Sorry, they were drugging me a lot. So basically, what I was trying to say was that human rights are being raised, and people in America are um, raising human rights about this and being told about this due to the fact that I'm being inhibited from studying. Now, the thing about it is, before November 20th, 2025, there were human rights concerns being raised after November 14th, 2025 in Moscow, Russia, because the Savant test was done then, and for 6 days there were human rights concerns being raised, but after November 20th, 2025, there was none, even though that was a false testimony. My point is, harassing and torturing me is not going to raise human rights concerns. You can make false testimonies, lies, exaggerations, do whatever the heck you feel like doing. Someone said something bad around me when I was a child, use that against me. By the way, that would only be saying and not doing. And what my dad was doing in 2011 was actually doing, and it was illegal, and law enforcement tipped him off about it. Anyways, the thing about it is, there's a lot you could do for torture and harassment, and that's the least of my concern. The thing is, the reason human rights concerns are being raised is I'm being inhibited from being able to study. Studying is not a crime, and since the slavery era of American history, everyone has been given the right to read and write. In fact, serial killers in prisons are allowed into prison libraries where they're allowed to read as well. And I am being inhibited from being able to study, even though, despite the fact that studying is not a crime. And if the government just lets me study and forces these people to just let me study while there's a trial going on, it's irrelevant what is going on and what is not. Everyone has the right to study, and I can even tell them what textbooks I'm going to study first. It's just, there's no excuse for not letting someone study. It's never happened before in American history where someone's inhibited from being able to study after spending their entire life since being an 11-year-old child, being a slave, literally, tortured every single David mental torture, being air drugged. All I want is to be able to study. And the artificial intelligence report from August 9, 2022, for 6 hours, April 22nd, 2025. You have June 5th, 2025. You have November 14th, 2025. Will all prove beyond a reasonable doubt the fact that I have a brain savant that our law enforcement is obsessed with. And all that law enforcement wants to do is inhibit me from being able to study. Inhibiting someone from studying has never happened before in American history. It's something that's never happened since the slavery era. It's making the government look incredibly guilty. And just by letting me study while the trial is going on is going to remove all the human rights concerns that are being raised around the world, because the government would not look as guilty anymore if they just let me study. I just want to study at home, not going anywhere outside to study. I'll just study at home. If the government just forces law enforcement to let me study, all the human rights concerns that are being raised around the world would immediately be removed, because this trial would look a lot more impartial than how it looks right now. There would be a lot of concerns that would be removed just by letting me study. You have to look at the history over here. Law enforcement has done absolutely nothing since 2001 except for run sex schemes with Uncle Joey's in-laws and money fraud. And if there was any crime that ever occurred, like the one they were trying to frame me for in 2023, law enforcement covered over it and, never cared about a thing about it, only to try to frame me for it. And despite the fact that the facts and evidences will show that no one ever even whispered anything about any weddings to me, because I could not afford to go anywhere, whether it was Assad's sister's wedding in 2003 or anyone else's, and nor could I afford to go anywhere where anyone would whisper any secrets to me in my ears, because I was working hard with my mother, as the facts and evidences will show. Ever since law enforcement found out about my brain savant, they've been so badly obsessed with it, they left behind everything to make sure that they could find an excuse to try to murder me. And by now, they've made numerous false testimonies and lies against me to try to do that. Right now, there are human rights concerns being raised around the world. not because I'm being harassed or tortured. You can make false testimonies on it, like you did on November 20th. Removed all, they did, law enforcement did, removed all the human rights concerns that were being raised since November 14th, since the world saw exactly what was there, which was a brain savant. And yeah, and so it's easily removed. But human rights concerns cannot be removed when you're inhibiting someone from being able to study. If the government just forces law enforcement to let me study, every single country that's raising human rights concerns will back off, so long as all my brain savant powers, ear drugging, is fully removed to let me study during the trial. No one would think of this as being impartial anymore, only because I'm being allowed to study. As long as all my powers are fully released, whether it's ears locked, ear drugging, all of it, fully removed, no more human rights concerns for the government to worry about, just by letting me study, since studying is a human right that everyone is born with. And since the slavery era of American history, no one's inhibited from being able to study. And I've been a slave since I was an 11-year-old child. All I want to do is I just want to study. That's all I want. And if the government forces law enforcement to just let me study, all of these human rights concerns will be fully removed, because there are a lot of excuses you can make for everything else. There's none you can make for inhibiting someone from being able to study. If the government lets me study and forces law enforcement to let me study, all of these human rights concerns would be removed. But you can't just let me study, since my brain savant has now become the main motive, according to me, for law enforcement's tortures and everything that they started against me with the false testimony starting from 2023, which means that it should be looked at by the courts first. A 30-minute brain savant test should be done first before letting me study. The main reason is, for the 4 years that I did study, from October 2019 till July 1st, 2023, they were using amnesia drugs on me so that I could not remember anything. And that wasn't exactly studying. They found out about my brain savant, studied it for 4 years, but I was not able to remember anything due to the amnesia drugs. So it has to be administered first for 30 minutes by the courts so that everyone could look at it through their own naked eye, through their own human naked eye, what it is, how it performs for 30 minutes. And that's only good for law enforcement, because if law enforcement's right and the brain savant doesn't exist, or it's anything less than extraordinary being seen in the 30 minutes, then law enforcement wins. They could just plain and simply say that their investigation was really an investigation, and it was, all the false testimonies were not based on my brain savant. And that's not why they're doing everything they're doing, just to make sure that my brain savant powers cannot be seen out in the open, performing due to extreme envy of law enforcement. So yeah, my point for making this video was to let the government know that by simply letting me study, they've removed all the human rights concerns throughout the entire world being raised against this government in the US, and all the concerns being raised by the ultra-rich in this country about how someone is not being allowed to study. Just because there's a trial going on does not mean you can inhibit someone from being able to study. This has not occurred since the slavery era of American history. But in order to enforce this, there has to be a 30-minute test first done before my brain savant's fully allowed to let me study. And the reason is, it has to be looked at by the courts first as a crucial piece of evidence, so that after those 30 minutes, when I'm allowed to study, we will all know for a fact that law enforcement is not cheating by using amnesia drugs like how they were using from October 2019 till July 1st, 2023. That's all I ask for. I just want to be able to study, and I want all my brain savant powers to be able to study. If the government just forces law enforcement to let me study, all these human rights concerns would be removed, mainly because there's no excuse for inhibiting someone from being able to study. Studying is a human right that every human being is born with. And since the slavery era of American history, no one's ever been inhibited from being able to study. If the government just forces law enforcement to let me study with all my brain savant powers, after letting it be seen performing out in the open for 30 minutes for the courts to first visibly see, and what that would do for me is guarantee that after the 30 minutes are done, they're not going to use amnesia drugs, because if they do, there would be obviously a huge difference between those 30 minutes and the rest of the time. So, yeah, the courts also have to look at it first for 30 minutes. First 30 minutes, the courts have to look at how the brain savant performs out in the open, and if it's anything less than extraordinary or not, and what the chances are that this is the reason law enforcement became obsessed with framing me since 2023 with all these different false testimonies in late 2023 with the wedding incident that they flashed me with over and over again, November 20th, 2025, mid-January 2026 with a 10-year-old child testifying 25 years later, group chat coming out of my overseas pharmacy school, more set of lies that my dad, the greedy framer, and his framer sisters were making, forcing the government informant to step in mid-March 2026, and then you have more set of lies that my dad, the greedy framer, was making, along with his framer sisters, that forced the courts to retrieve every single phone conversation there was. And then you also have very guilty things like trying to get me to commit incest every time my dad, the greedy framer, is found lying. And what that really did was, except for the lies, you now also have all the greedy tactics that my dad, the greedy framer, was trying to do in order to try to get illegal assurances of money from me. So basically, you have, they're using drugs on me, so I can't remember anything. Yeah. So you basically now you have my dad, the greedy framer, all these false testimonies, okay? And so, yeah. So my point basically being that inhibiting someone from being able to study just because there's a trial going on is not right, because studying is a human right. And you have to look at the fact that law enforcement, since the year 2001, has done absolutely nothing except for run sex schemes with Uncle Joey's in-laws, followed by money fraud. And all that law enforcement has ever done is cover over everything that ever happened, only for us to find out that as soon as law enforcement finds out about my brain savant, law enforcement is absolutely obsessed with it. They let go of all their BFFs and all their friends, and they are trying to frame me in any way, shape, or form possible, with one false testimony after another. Yeah, and law enforcement even tried to force me to help them and their BFFs like Uncle Joey with their sex scheme ads in November 2023. Facts and evidences will show that law enforcement's BFFs I have not seen since I gained the slightest bit of mental maturity as a child, only because my mother had gained her independence at the same time I gained the slightest bit of mental maturity as a child, which meant that my mother told me to either be limited by these people or to not go near them ever again. And I never went near them ever again, regardless of how much law enforcement tried to torture me, to force me to go near Uncle Joey after my brain savant was found out about, and law enforcement themselves went around telling everyone about, only to get me and force me to help their friend Uncle Joey run a sex scheme ad around the man with the brain savant that law enforcement had found out about, that now law enforcement wanted to frame due to their extreme envy against me. Facts and evidences will show that I was severely tortured by law enforcement, to the point that Parvez Elahi from Pakistan realized that this man, Uncle Joey, was some sort of a big shot that law enforcement had to help at any cost, due to how much they were torturing me just to force me to help them and their friend Uncle Joey with their sex scene ads. Despite this, I remember the depression my mother had to go through because of all these low-life friends of law enforcement from the family, because of the kind of things that they would do online. And yeah, and it was because of that every single time law enforcement asked me to help them with their friend BFFs like Uncle Joey run a sex scheme ad, I refused each and every time, making the last time I've met him when I was a child less than someone who even has mental maturity, slightest bit of mental maturity as a child. A very long time ago, decades ago was the last time. And what was the last time law enforcement tried to force me to meet him? A few months ago. And I refused each and every single time law enforcement asked. I only did this because um, there's I only did this because I realized that law enforcement and their friends were up to no good, and that I had to work hard in life, just like how I did to complete my overseas pharmacy degree, just like how my sister did to get all her degrees from UMBC, her MBA and masters, just like how I did to complete my overseas pharmacy school with 108 finals that I passed, despite law enforcement themselves telling the courts that they forced me to fail a lot of the exams, like the last biochem exam I had to give, using severe amount of amnesia drugs in the exam room, and while I would be trying to study, and I would study with a locked brain already. Severe amount of amnesia drugs being used on top of that. And law enforcement, I'm only giving the example for the biochem exam, and you will find out that the biochem exam is the only example I'm giving, but it's a sure one where law enforcement used severe amounts of amnesia drugs, due to which I could not even remember how to spell my own name during the exam, in the exam hall. And I still managed to get my college degree completed, one way or another, sleeping on the side of the streets, running on 2 sandwiches and a pack of ramen noodles for months. That's the kind of hard work my mother had ingrained into me. So meeting people that were lowlifes in the family, like Uncle Joey, just because they're friends of law enforcement, was not going to happen. And since I was a child, it has not. The only thing I ask the government to do now is to remove the human rights concerns that are being raised around the world. And it's very simple to do so. Please ask the courts to administer a 30-minute brain savant test by simply letting my brain savant go for only 30 minutes, so everyone in the world could see it performing out in the open and see exactly what a nothing burger I am in the end of the 30 minutes. And if I really am a nothing burger, like law enforcement likes to claim and wishes for it to be reality, then law enforcement will win their case right away. My entire motive against them is that all they've done since 2001 is run sex scenes with Uncle Joey's in-laws, followed by money fraud, money which is still being exchanged right now. Started with, they're not letting me talk right now. Started with unemployment disability fraud. Obviously, no one gives their own money. And wire transfer to law enforcement's friends, only to find out about my brain savant and try to frame me with all of their friends and BFFs included in any way, shape, or form they could. Despite the fact that I was never even present in any of the settings for any of the family gatherings, to the point that this wedding incident that they tried to frame me for in the year 2023, I would not even be present there. Not only that, despite me being watched 24/7, there would not be a single incident of me ever having anyone whisper into my ears anything about this incident. And despite this, law enforcement desperately tried to frame me in the year 2023, proving beyond a reasonable doubt that I'm telling the truth about the fact that I could not afford to go anywhere or talk to anyone who would tell me any secrets whatsoever. My only concern is I want to be able to study, because I know what kind of powers I have, and I know what law enforcement's really been up to. They couldn't care less about anything else. All they want is sex, money, that they're transferring right now, doing anything for right now, and extreme envy against my brain savant, which is why they want me framed. I have no, I couldn't care less about any of these girls that they told about my brain savant. Rest assured, I will push them all off. I couldn't care less about any of them. I just want my brain savant powers so I could get my work done. And if you don't believe anything I'm telling you, then I'm sure you'll believe artificial intelligence, since no one thinks of it as being a liar, and nor am I psychic enough to guess what its reports say about my brain savant. So the only thing I would like to say is the governments have a choice to make right now. They can either let law enforcement inhibit me from studying, despite studying being a human right, or they could remove all the human rights concerns going on around the world by simply forcing the government to courts to administer a simple 30-minute brain savant test by letting my brain savant go for 30 minutes and force law enforcement to let it see being performing out in the open for only 30 minutes to find out exactly how much of a liar me and artificial intelligence are, and how much law enforcement's been telling the truth all along. And I think we all know what the answer to that question is. But after that 30-minute test is administered, I want to be able to study, and the government can remove all the human rights concerns being raised around the world by letting this trial look more impartial, by just simply letting me study while I'm going through this trial. Thank you.